Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the gentle corridors of history. Tonight, we invite you to settle into comfort, to let your breathing slow and deepen, as we embark on a timeless odyssey through the rich tapestry of Greek mythology. Close your eyes, if you haven't already, and imagine yourself transported not to a world of thunderous battles and dramatic proclamations, but to the quiet moments between the legends, the everyday rhythms that shaped how ancient Greeks understood their world, their gods, and themselves. It was a living, breathing framework that explained the turning of seasons, the rushing of rivers, the mysterious workings of love and death, and the delicate balance between order and chaos. For over 1,000 years, these stories provided comfort, meaning, and structure to countless lives across the Mediterranean world. Greek mythology was never simply a collection of fantastical stories. Tonight, we will walk through this ancient landscape with measured steps, exploring not just the grand narratives you may know, but the intimate details of how these myths wove themselves into the fabric of daily existence. We'll discover how a farmer might have understood the changing seasons through Demeter's grief, how a sailor might have whispered prayers to Poseidon before each voyage, and how families gathered around hearth fires to share these timeless tales. Let the weight of your day begin to lift as we step back in time, to an age when the boundary between the mortal and divine was as thin as morning mist, and every natural phenomenon held the whisper of a story waiting to be told. Picture yourself awakening in a modest stone house on the outskirts of Athens, circa 450 BCE. The first pale light of dawn filters through a small window, carrying with it the distant sound of roosters and the gentle lowing of cattle. The gods were not distant figures dwelling in unreachable realms, but intimate presences woven into every aspect of daily existence. They were in the bread rising in the morning oven, in the silver flash of fish in the harbor, in the steady rhythm of the loom. As your eyes adjust to the soft morning light, you might offer a quiet prayer to Eos, the rosy-fingered goddess of dawn, thanking her for bringing another day safely to your doorstep. Here sits a modest clay figurine of Hestia, goddess of the hearth, alongside a few dried flowers and a small offering of olive oil from yesterday's meal. The oak tree near your door might house a dryad, a tree spirit who had lived there for centuries. A small temple to Hermes might stand at the crossroads, where merchants would leave offerings before beginning their journeys. The blacksmith's quarter would honor Hephaestus, the divine craftsman, whose forge fires burned eternally beneath Mount Etna. Young girls might pretend to be priestesses, offering flower crowns to imaginary deities, while boys enacted the adventures of Heracles or Theseus. These weren't mere entertainment, they were education, a way of passing down the cultural knowledge that would shape these children as understanding of the world for the rest of their lives. These weren't formal recitations, but intimate conversations in which mythology lived and breathed. A grandmother might tell her grandchildren about the time Demeter searched the earth for her lost daughter, explaining why the grain grew tall in summer and died back in winter. A father might recount the adventures of Odysseus, teaching his sons about the virtues of cunning and perseverance. The potters would pay reverence to Athena, whose wisdom guided their hands as they shaped clay into vessels both beautiful and functional. The stream running behind your house would be the domain of water nymphs, whose favor you might seek if you needed fresh water for your household. The scales used by merchants were under the protection of Dike, goddess of justice, who ensured fair dealing. The very act of commerce was a form of prayer, an acknowledgement that prosperity came through divine favor and human cooperation. These were not solemn, dreary affairs, but joyous celebrations that brought entire communities together. The Panathenea, held every 4 years in honor of Athena, featured athletic competitions, musical performances, and a grand procession in which the entire city participated. The newly woven peplasa, sacred robe, would be carried to the Parthenon and draped over the ancient wooden statue of Athena in a ceremony that connected the present generation to countless generations that had come before. The very ground beneath your feet was the body of Gaia, the Earth Mother, whose breathing created the gentle hills and valleys of your homeland. The shrine is humble, worn smooth by countless touches, but it represents something profound, the understanding that the sacred and mundane were never separate. This is how most Greeks began each day, not with the dramatic proclamations of heroes, but with small acknowledgments of the divine forces that governed their world. The fire was Hestia's domain, and she was perhaps the most important deity in the daily life of Greeks, though she rarely appears in the dramatic myths we remember today. The bread was a gift from Demeter, goddess of the harvest, whose annual grief for her daughter Persephone brought winter to the world. The olives were sacred to Athena, whose gift of the olive tree had won her the patronage of Athens itself. The wine belonged to Dionysus, god of the vine, whose influence could bring both joy and madness. She was the warmth that kept families together, the light that pushed back the darkness, the steady flame around which all domestic life revolved. As you rise from your simple bed perhaps, a wooden frame strung with leather strips, covered with wool blankets dyed in soft earth tones, you might notice the small household shrine in the corner of your room. Moving through your morning routine, you would light the central hearth fire, and in doing so, you would be participating in a ritual as old as human civilization itself. The morning meal would be simple barley bread, perhaps some goat cheese, olives, and wine mixed with water. But even these humble foods carried divine significance. As you stepped outside your home, the entire world would reveal itself as a landscape populated by divine presences. Walking through the agora, the central marketplace of your city, you would encounter dozens of shrines, altars, and sacred spaces. The market itself was a symphony of divine influences. The silver coins in your pouch bore the image of Athena's owl, marking them as sacred objects in their own right. Children played in the streets, their games often mimicking the stories of gods and heroes. As the day progressed, you might witness various religious festivals and processions. The evening hours brought their own rituals and observances. As darkness fell, families would gather around their hearth fires to share the day's experiences and tell the old stories. The boundary between history and myth was fluid in these fireside conversations. The Trojan War was as real to most Greeks as any contemporary conflict, and the heroes of that war were their ancestors, their cultural patrimony, when they spoke. Of Achilles or Hector, they weren't discussing fictional characters, but real people whose choices and sacrifices had shaped the world they now inhabited. As you prepared for sleep, you might offer final prayers to various deities, to Hypnos, god of sleep, for peaceful rest, to Morpheus, god of dreams, for meaningful visions, to the household gods for protection through the night hours. Sleep itself was understood as a small death, a temporary journey to the realm of Hades, and like all journeys, it required divine protection and guidance. The night sounds around you would carry their own mythological significance. The cry of an owl might be a message from Athena, goddess of wisdom. The distant howl of a wolf could be associated with Apollo, who was both the god of light and the god of wolves. Even the rustling of leaves in the wind might be interpreted as the whispers of dryads, sharing secrets with the night air. In this world, every natural phenomenon had a story. Every cultural practice had divine sanction, and every human action had cosmic significance. The myths weren't abstract theological concepts, but practical explanations for the way things worked. Why did the sun rise each day? Because Helios drove his chariot across the sky. Why did the tides ebb and flow? Because Poseidon was adjusting his underwater realm. Why did people fall in love? Because Aphrodite and her son, Eros, were directing their arrows toward human hearts. This integration of the mythological and the mundane created a world of profound meaning and connection. Every Greek citizen, from the humblest farmer to the most powerful aristocrat, lived within this shared narrative framework. They understood themselves as part of a cosmic drama that had been unfolding since the beginning of time, and their daily actions as meaningful contributions to that ongoing story. The seasonal festivals that punctuated the Greek year reinforced this sense of cosmic participation. The Thesmophoria, a women's festival honoring Demeter and Persephone, coincided with the autumn planting season. The Dionysiac festivals marked the time of wine harvest and the pressing of grapes. The Anthesteria, the spring festival of flowers, celebrated the return of Persephone from the underworld and the renewal of life after winter's death. These celebrations weren't mere pageantry, but essential expressions of the community's relationship with the divine order. Through ritual, song, dance, and shared feast, the Greeks maintained their connection to the gods and ensured the continuation of divine favor. The festivals were times when the normal rules of social hierarchy were temporarily suspended, when slaves might feast alongside their masters, and when the entire community could experience itself as a single, unified entity. As our first segment draws to a close, imagine yourself settling into sleep in that ancient Greek household, surrounded by the quiet presence of the gods, secure in the knowledge that you are part of a story much larger than your individual existence. The myths that shaped your understanding of the world were not distant abstractions, but intimate companions, guiding your steps through each day and offering comfort in times of uncertainty. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to honor the gods, to participate in the ongoing creation of meaning, and to add your own small thread to the vast tapestry of human experience. But for now, in the gentle darkness of a Mediterranean night, you could rest peacefully, knowing that you were held within a framework of stories that had provided comfort and guidance for countless generations before you. Let us now turn our attention to the beginning of all things, to the vast and gentle unfolding of creation itself. In the beginning, the Greeks believed there was only chaos, not the frenzied disorder we might imagine today, but something closer to a yawning void, an infinite potential waiting to be given form. Picture this primordial state as a vast, dark ocean of possibility, neither hot nor cold, neither light nor dark, but simply empty. Waiting. From this peaceful emptiness, the first beings emerged, with the slow inevitability of dawn breaking over still waters. Gaia, the Earth Mother, was among the first, her vast body becoming the foundation upon which all life would eventually flourish. She was not the Earth as we might visualize it today, green and populated, but rather the essential principle of groundedness, of solid reality emerging from the cosmic void. Her breathing created the first mountains, gentle swells in the primordial landscape, and her tears became the first springs and rivers. Alongside Gaia came Tartarus, the deep places beneath the earth, and Eros, the force of attraction that would eventually draw all things together in the dance of creation. These were not personalities in the way we understand them, but rather fundamental forces, the basic building blocks of reality itself. Eros was not yet the mischievous Cupid of later stories, but something far more profound, the cosmic principle that ensures things come together rather than drift apart in eternal isolation. From Gaia's solitary contemplation came her first children. Without need for a partner, she gave birth to Uranus, the star-filled sky, who stretched himself above her like a protective canopy. She also created the mountains, each peak a testament to her creative power, and Pontus, the ancient sea, whose waters would cradle the first forms of life. These births were not violent or dramatic, but gentle emergences, like flowers opening in the warmth of a perfect morning. The union of Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky, produced the first generation of divine beings that would shape the cosmos. Their children were the Titans, enormous beings who embodied the raw forces of nature. There was Oceanus, the great river that encircled the world, his waters flowing in an endless, soothing circle. Tethys, his sister and wife, was the source of all the world's fresh water. Every spring, every river, every gentle rain that nourished the growing earth. Hyperion and Theia gave birth to the celestial lights that would measure time and seasons. Their son Helios became the sun, driving his golden chariot across the sky each day with methodical precision. Their daughter Selene became the moon, her silver light casting gentle shadows across the nighttime world. And their daughter Eos became the dawn, her rosy fingers painting the eastern sky each morning with soft colors that eased the transition from night to day. But perhaps the most significant of the Titans was Kronos, the youngest son of Gaia and Uranus. His name meant time, and he would become the ruler of the Golden Age, a period of peace and abundance that the Greeks looked back upon with deep nostalgia. Kronos was patient and methodical, understanding that all things must unfold in their proper sequence, that rushing toward the future only creates chaos and suffering. The early cosmos was a place of careful order and gentle hierarchy. Uranus ruled over all creation, his star-filled body embracing the earth each night in a union that ensured the continuation of life. But as often happens in the great cycles of existence, the older generation began to fear the power of the younger. Uranus, growing concerned about the strength of his Titan children, decided to prevent them from challenging his authority by forcing them back into Gaia's womb, keeping them trapped within the earth itself. This created the first great sorrow. In the cosmos, Gaia, the patient Earth Mother, found herself in constant pain as her children struggled within her body, unable to emerge into the light. She conceived a plan to free them, crafting a great sickle from the hardest stone and asking her children to help her confront their father. Only Kronos, the youngest, had the courage to accept this burden. The confrontation between Kronos and Uranus was swift and decisive, but we need not dwell on its violent details. What matters is that it represented a necessary transition, the eternal cycle by which one generation must step aside to allow the next to flourish. Uranus, wounded, withdrew to the highest heavens, while Kronos took his place as ruler of the cosmos. From the blood of Uranus spilled upon the earth, sprang the Furies' ancient spirits of justice and the giants, and from the foam where his essence met the sea, Aphrodite, goddess of love, was born. Under Kronos' rule, the Golden Age began. This was a time of perfect climate, when the earth produced food without the need for human labor, when there was no war, no injustice, no suffering. Humans lived like gods, spending their days in peaceful contemplation, their nights in gentle sleep. There was no need for laws or governments, because all beings lived in harmony with the natural order. Death, when it came, was like falling into a peaceful sleep, and the spirits of the departed continued to watch over the living with benevolent care. Kronos himself was a thoughtful ruler, understanding that power must be exercised with wisdom and restraint. He married his sister Rhea, and together they presided over this age of peace and plenty. But like his father before him, Kronos began to worry about the future. A prophecy had warned him that one of his children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Uranus. The cycle of generations would continue, and his reign would eventually end. Rather than accept this natural progression, Kronos decided to prevent it. Each time Rhea gave birth, he would swallow the child immediately, keeping it safe within his own body, where it could neither grow nor challenge his authority. First went Hestia, the gentle goddess of the hearth. Then Demeter, who would have brought the gift of agriculture to humanity. Then Hera, destined to be queen of the gods. Then Hades, future ruler of the underworld. Then Poseidon, who would command the seas. Rhea, like her mother Gaia before her, found herself in agony as her children were taken from her. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she resolved to save this child. She traveled to the island of Crete to a cave on Mount Dicte, and there gave birth to Zeus in secret. The island nymphs helped her care for the infant, while the young warriors known as the Curetes danced and clashed their spears and shields to mask the sound of the baby's crying. Meanwhile, Rhea returned to Kronos with a large stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. The Titan king, perhaps distracted by the cares of ruling, swallowed the stone without realizing the deception. Zeus grew to maturity in the safety of the Cretan cave, nourished by the goat Amalthea and educated by the wise beings of the island. He learned patience and strategy, understanding that when the time came to challenge his father, he would need more than just strength. When Zeus reached adulthood, he knew his destiny. The cycle of generations must continue, and he must free his siblings from their imprisonment within Kronos' body. Rather than attack his father directly, Zeus chose cunning over force. He disguised himself as a cupbearer and offered Kronos a special drenka-chi, mixture of wine and herbs that would cause him to disgorge everything he had swallowed. The plan worked perfectly. Kronos, trusting his young cupbearer, drank deeply and immediately began to vomit up Zeus's siblings. First came the stone he had swallowed. Thinking it was Zeus, this stone would later be placed at Delphi as a sacred monument. Then came Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia, all of them fully grown and ready to take their place in the cosmic order. But the transition from the age of Kronos to the age of Zeus was not accomplished without struggle. The Titans, loyal to their king, refused to accept the new order. What followed was a war that shook the foundations of the cosmos itself, the Titanomachy, the great battle between the old gods and the new. This conflict lasted for 10 years, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The war was fought not with petty malice or personal ambition, but with the inexorable force of historical necessity. It was the cosmos itself choosing its future, deciding whether to remain in the golden age of Kronos or to move forward into a new era of greater complexity and possibility. The battles took place on a scale impossible for human minds to fully comprehend, with mountains used as weapons and the very seas boiling from the heat of divine conflict. Finally, Zeus realized that victory would require allies beyond his siblings. He descended to Tartarus, the deepest part of the underworld, and freed 3 groups of beings whom Uranus had imprisoned there: the Cyclopes, the Hecaton Shires, and other ancient powers. The Cyclopes, grateful for their freedom, forged mighty weapons for Zeus and his brothers: the thunderbolt for Zeus, the trident for Poseidon, and the helmet of invisibility for Hades. With these new allies and weapons, the tide of war turned. The Hecaton Shires, the 100-handed giants, could hurl boulders faster than arrows, while Zeus's thunderbolts could shatter mountains. The Titans, magnificent though they were, represented the past, and the future belonged to Zeus and his generation. One by one, the Titans were defeated and bound, and cast into Tartarus, where they would remain for eternity, not as punishment, but as a necessary part of the cosmic order. Only Atlas, the Titan who had carried the heavens upon his shoulders, received a different fate. He was condemned to hold up the sky forever, ensuring that heaven and earth would never again embrace so closely that their children would be trapped between them. His eternal labor was both burden and honor, a reminder that even in defeat, the Titans continued to serve essential functions in the cosmic order. With the war ended, Zeus and his siblings established the new order that would govern the cosmos for ages to come. They divided the universe among themselves with the solemnity of a sacred ritual. Zeus claimed the sky and the upper air, becoming king of the gods. Poseidon took dominion over the seas and all waters. Hades accepted rulership of the underworld and the realm of the dead. The earth itself remained common territory, shared by all the gods. This division was not arbitrary, but reflected the natural order of things. Zeus, as the youngest and the one who had initiated the change, possessed the authority to lead. His realm, the sky, was the highest and most visible, the source of weather and the celestial signs by which mortals would learn the will of the gods. Poseidon's domain, the sea, was vast and mysterious, subject to sudden storms and unexpected calms. Hades's kingdom, though dark and feared, was absolutely necessary, for without death, there could be no meaning to life, no urgency to virtue, no poignancy to love. The establishment of the Olympian order marked the beginning of the age in which mortals would eventually appear. It was a time of greater complexity than the golden age of Kronos, but also a time of greater possibility. The gods were no longer distant, abstract forces, but personalities with whom humans could potentially interact. They had emotions, desires, and conflicts that mortals could understand and, in some cases, influence through prayer and sacrifice. Zeus took as his queen his sister Hera, goddess of marriage and family life. Their wedding was celebrated by all. The gods marked the formal beginning of the Olympic pantheon. But Zeus's nature was expansive and creative, and he would have many other relationships that would produce the diverse family of gods and goddesses who would govern every aspect of human experience. From his union with Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, came Athena, who emerged fully grown from Zeus's head, already wearing armor and ready to serve as goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. From his relationship with Leto came the twins Apollo and Artemis, gods of light and the hunt. From his connection with Maia came Hermes, the messenger god and guide of souls. Each birth added new dimensions to the divine family, new aspects of existence under divine protection. As this great saga of cosmic transition draws to a close, we see how the Greeks understood change itself, not as chaos or destruction, but as the natural rhythm of existence. Each generation must give way to the next. Each age must yield to new possibilities. The golden age of Kronos was beautiful, but it was also static, a perfect moment that could not last forever. The age of Zeus brought conflict and complexity, but it also brought growth, diversity, and the possibility of genuine relationship between mortals and immortals. In the quiet of your evening rest, you might reflect on how these ancient stories speak to the eternal human experience of change and transition. Every ending contains the seeds of a new beginning. Every defeat carries within it the possibility of unexpected victory. The Greeks knew this truth intimately, and they wove it into the very fabric of their understanding of the cosmos. As we settle deeper into our exploration of Greek mythology, let us pause to consider the mysterious layers that lie beneath these familiar stories. Like archaeologists carefully brushing away centuries of accumulated dust, we can uncover the hidden meanings, the ancient memories, and the profound cultural truths that these myths preserved across millennia. The stories we have just heard about, the birth of the cosmos and the rise of the Olympians, were not merely entertainment for the ancient Greeks. They were living documents, cultural DNA, that carried within them the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. Each myth was like a seed that contained within it multiple layers of meaning, historical memory, psychological insight, spiritual truth, and practical wisdom, all wrapped together in the gentle embrace of narrative. Consider for a moment the figure of Gaia, the Earth Mother. To the casual listener, she might seem like a simple personification of the Earth itself. But archaeological evidence suggests that Gaia represents something far more ancient and profound, a memory of the earliest human religious experience, when our ancestors recognized the Earth as a living, breathing entity deserving of reverence and respect. Long before the Greeks built their marble temples, people gathered in sacred groves and cave sanctuaries to honor the Great Mother, leaving offerings of grain and flowers, pottery, and precious stones dot in the caves of Crete, where Zeus was said to have been born. archaeologists have discovered evidence of continuous religious activity spanning over 3,000 years. The walls of these caves are worn smooth by the touch of countless hands, generations of pilgrims who came to honor the divine child and seek blessings for their own families. The limestone formations within these caves create natural altars and sacred spaces, as if the earth itself were designed to be a temple. The myth of Kronos devouring his children carries within it the echo of ancient fears and ancient wisdom. On one level, it speaks to the universal human anxiety about the passage of time and the inevitability of change. But archaeological evidence from across the Mediterranean reveals that this story may also preserve memories of actual historical practices. Periods when older ruling elites literally consumed the resources that should have nourished the next generation, creating cycles of famine and social collapse. The careful study of ancient pottery reveals fascinating insights into how these myths evolved over time. On the earliest vases, dating back to the 8th century BCE, we see simple, almost abstract representations of the gods. Zeus appears as a bearded figure holding a lightning bolt, but his features are generic, symbolic, rather than individualized. Over the centuries, as Greek culture became more sophisticated, these representations became more complex and nuanced, reflecting the growing psychological depth of the myths themselves. The mystery religions of ancient Greece offer another window into the hidden meanings of these stories. The Eleusinian mysteries, centered on the myth of Demeter and Persephone, promised initiates a profound spiritual transformation through direct experience of the divine. The exact nature of these rituals remains unknown. The initiates were sworn to secrecy, and they kept their oath so well that even today, we can only guess at what they experienced in the sacred halls of Eleusis. What we do know is that the mystery. Religions interpreted the familiar myths in ways that revealed their deeper spiritual significance. The story of Persephone's descent into the underworld and her annual return was not just an explanation for the changing seasons, but a profound meditation on death and rebirth, on the eternal cycle of loss and renewal that governs all existence. Initiates who participated in these mysteries often reported that they no longer feared death, having experienced firsthand the truth that what appears to be ending is actually transformation. The archaeological record also reveals the practical ways in which these myths shaped ancient Greek society. The layout of Greek cities reflected mythological principles. The agora, or marketplace, was always located near temples to Hermes and Athena, the gods of commerce and wisdom. The gymnasiums, where young men trained their bodies and minds, were sacred to Hermes and Apollo. Even the positioning of houses and neighborhoods followed patterns that honored the gods and ensured divine protection for the community. Recent underwater archaeology has uncovered evidence of ancient Greek religious practices that were previously unknown. Off the coast of various Greek islands, divers had discovered underwater caves that were clearly used as sacred spaces. These submerged temples contain offerings of pottery, jewelry, and bronze figurines dating back over 2,000 years. The offerings were made to sea gods and nymphs, deities who protected sailors and fishermen, but who rarely appear in the grand mythological narratives. We know today, these underwater discoveries remind us that the mythology we have inherited represents only a fraction of the rich spiritual life of ancient Greece. For every story about Zeus or Athena that was recorded by poets and preserved in libraries, there were dozens of local myths, family traditions, and regional variations that were passed down orally and eventually lost to time. The myths we know today are like the peaks of mountains, impressive and memorable, but representing only the highest points of a vast underwater landscape of stories and beliefs. The mystery of the linear B tablets provides another fascinating glimpse into the prehistory of Greek mythology. These clay tablets, discovered at Knossos and other Bronze Age sites, contain the earliest known examples of written Greek. When scholars finally deciphered them in the 1950s, they revealed administrative records from Mycenaean palaces dating back to 1450 BCE among the mundane lists of livestock and grain supplies. Archaeologists found references to religious ceremonies and offerings to gods whose names were clearly ancestral to the later Olympian deities. Most intriguingly, the tablets mention a deity called Poseidon, who seems to have been the chief god of the Mycenaean pantheon, more important even than Zeus. This suggests that the familiar hierarchy of the Olympian gods that we know from later Greek literature was not original, but rather the result of historical changes and cultural adaptations over many centuries. The myths, in other words, were not static stories, but living traditions that evolved and adapted to meet the changing needs of Greek society. The archaeological evidence also reveals the profound influence of ancient Greek mythology on surrounding cultures. From the Black Sea to the Western Mediterranean, archaeologists have found evidence of Greek religious practices and mythological motifs adapted by local populations. A temple to Aphrodite in ancient Scythia incorporates local artistic styles while maintaining the essential features of Greek religious architecture. Egyptian papyri contain stories that blend traditional Egyptian mythology with Greek elements, creating hybrid narratives that reflect the cosmopolitan nature of the ancient Mediterranean world. One of the most mysterious aspects of Greek mythology is the question of how much these stories reflect actual historical events. The myth of the Trojan War, for example, was long considered pure fiction until Heinrich Schliemann's excavations at Troy in the late 19th century revealed evidence of a city that had indeed been destroyed by warfare around the time the myth suggested. Since then, archaeologists have uncovered increasing evidence that many of the mythological events described in ancient Greek literature may have been based on real historical occurrences, preserved in cultural memory and gradually transformed into the stories we know today. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, for instance, may be reflected in the myths about the war between the Titans and the Olympians. This period saw the destruction of most of the great palace civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean, the collapse of trade networks, and the loss of literacy in many regions. The myths about cosmic warfare and the overthrow of the old gods may represent a cultural memory of this traumatic period, when the familiar world of the Bronze Age gave way to the uncertain beginnings of the Iron Age. The mystery schools of ancient Greece recognized that myths operate on multiple levels simultaneously. A story like the birth of Athena from Zeus's head could be understood as a literal account of divine reproduction, as a symbolic representation of the relationship between wisdom and authority, as a psychological metaphor for the birth of new ideas, or as a historical allegory about the incorporation of an ancient goddess into a newer religious system. The greatest wisdom lay not in choosing one interpretation over others, but in recognizing that all these levels of meaning could coexist within the same narrative. Modern psychological research has revealed additional layers of meaning in these ancient stories. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious suggests that myths like those of ancient Greece may represent universal human experiences encoded in symbolic form. The story of Persephone's abduction, for example, might reflect the universal human experience of loss and separation, while her eventual return represents the equally universal hope for reunion and renewal. Archaeological evidence from ancient Greek sanctuaries reveals the deeply personal ways in which ordinary people engaged with these myths. Thousands of small terracotta figurines, personal offerings left at temples and shrines, depict not the grand gods of official mythology, but humble domestic deities and local spirits. These offerings suggest that for most Greeks, mythology was not an abstract theological system, but a practical resource for dealing with the challenges of daily life. The sanctuary of Asclepius at Epidaurus, for example, contains hundreds of inscribed stone tablets describing miraculous healings. These inscriptions reveal how the myth of Asclepius, the god of medicine, provided both hope and practical guidance for people suffering from illness. The stories of miraculous cures served not just as propaganda for the sanctuary, but as a form of primitive psychotherapy, helping patients mobilize their own healing resources through the power of belief and community support. The archaeological record also reveals the economic and political dimensions of Greek mythology. The great temples were not just religious centers, but also economic institutions, controlling vast amounts of wealth and land. The myths that justified these temples' authority stories about divine commands to build sanctuaries, miraculous interventions on behalf of particular cities, and the special relationships between gods and mortal rulers served important social and political functions beyond their spiritual significance. As we consider these mysterious layers of meaning, we begin to understand that Greek mythology was far more than a collection of entertaining stories. It was a comprehensive system for understanding and organizing human experience, a cultural technology that helped ancient peoples navigate the complexities of existence. The myths provided explanations for natural phenomena, frameworks for moral decision-making, models for social organization, and sources of comfort in times of crisis. Asterisk. As we enter the final portion of our gentle journey through Greek mythology, let us explore how these ancient stories both reflected and shaped the social structures of Greek society. The divine hierarchy of Mount Olympus was not merely a heavenly arrangement, it was a mirror of earthly power, a blueprint for understanding how authority, responsibility, and social order functioned in the world of mortals. Imagine yourself as a member of the Athenian aristocracy in the 5th century BCE, awakening in a spacious villa overlooking the Aegean Sea. Your home is built around a central courtyard where marble statues of your family's patron deities stand in quiet contemplation. The walls are adorned with frescoes depicting scenes from the Iliad and Odyssey, stories that your family claims as part of their ancestral heritage. Your very identity is woven into these mythological narratives. You trace your lineage back to the heroes of Troy, and your political authority derives, in part, from this divine connection. The aristocratic understanding of mythology was fundamentally different from that of common citizens. While a farmer might pray to Demeter for a good harvest, you would understand yourself as participating in a cosmic drama of power and responsibility. Your wealth was not merely personal property, but a sacred trust, a reflection of divine favor that carried with it obligations to the gods and to society. The myths provided you with models for leadership, examples of how divine authority could be exercised wisely or foolishly, and warnings about the consequences of hubris. The story of Zeus's rise to power, for instance, was not simply an entertaining tale, but a sophisticated political treatise. Zeus succeeded where his predecessors failed because he understood that true authority must be shared rather than hoarded. Unlike Kronos, who tried to prevent change by devouring his children, Zeus actively cultivated alliances, delegated responsibilities, and adapted to new circumstances. He made his brothers Poseidon and Hades partners rather than subjects, and he integrated the older generation of gods into his new order rather than simply destroying them. This mythological model of leadership had profound implications for how Greek aristocrats understood their own roles. The greatest leaders were those who could build coalitions, who could balance competing interests, and who could adapt their strategies to changing circumstances. The myth of Zeus also suggested that legitimate authority came not from birthright alone, but from the ability to create order from chaos, to transform conflict into cooperation. The symposium, the aristocratic drinking party, was where these mythological models were most explicitly discussed and debated. Picture yourself reclining on elaborately decorated couches, surrounded by your peers, as a professional storyteller recounts the adventures of Odysseus. But this is not mere entertainment, it is education. The stories prompt discussions about the nature of wisdom, the importance of loyalty, the proper relationship between cunning and honor. Each tale becomes a case study in leadership, a way of exploring the challenges and responsibilities of power. The aristocratic understanding of mythology also emphasized the importance of divine favor and the precarious nature of human success. The story of Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia, served as a constant reminder that even the greatest prosperity could be swept away by the gods' will. Croesus consulted the oracle at Delphi before making major decisions, offering magnificent gifts to ensure divine support. Yet when he misinterpreted the oracle's prophecy and attacked Persia, he lost everything. The moral was clear. Wealth and power were gifts from the gods, not personal achievements, and they could be withdrawn at any moment. This aristocratic worldview stood in marked contrast to the way common citizens experienced and understood the same myths. In the crowded neighborhoods of Athens, where artisans and merchants lived in modest houses separated by narrow streets, the stories of gods and heroes had different meanings and applications. Here, mythology was less about cosmic politics and more about daily survival, less about divine authority and more about divine protection. Consider the life of a potter in the Kerameikos district, the artisan quarter of Athens. Your small workshop is blessed by a shrine to Athena, the patron goddess of crafts, and your day begins with a simple offering of bread and wine. But your relationship with the goddess is not one of aristocratic identification. You do not claim descent from her or see yourself as a representative on earth. Instead, you understand yourself as her humble servant, dependent on her favor for the success of your work. The myths that matter most to you are not the grand political dramas of Olympus, but the smaller, more intimate stories of divine intervention in human affairs. You remember the tale of Athena, teaching the first potter how to shape clay, how to judge the heat of the kiln, how to create glazes that would not crack or fade. These technical details, preserved in mythological form, represent generations of accumulated wisdom about your craft. The goddess is not just a distant divine figure, but a practical presence in your workshop, guiding your hands as you shape the clay dot. Your understanding of divine justice is also shaped by your social position. The aristocrats may debate the political implications of Zeus's rule, but for you, the most important aspect of the king of gods is his role as protector of the weak and defender of justice. You remember the stories of Zeus punishing kings who abused their power, of his special care for beggars and strangers, of his wrath against those who violated the sacred laws of hospitality. These stories give you hope that even if human authorities fail you, divine justice will ultimately prevail. The religious festivals that punctuated the Greek year revealed these class differences in particularly vivid ways. During the Panathenea, the great festival honoring Athena, the entire city participated in a massive procession from the Kerameikos to the Acropolis. But your role in this procession was very different from that of the aristocrats. While they rode in chariots or on horseback, wearing elaborate robes and golden jewelry, you walked with your fellow craftsmen, carrying the tools of your trade and wearing your best but still modest clothing. Yet the festival also created moments of temporary equality that reflected the deepest truths of Greek mythology. When the great sacrifice was made at the Parthenon, the meat was distributed to all citizens regardless of their social status. The gods, the myths suggested, were ultimately more concerned with piety and virtue than with wealth and mirth. The humble offering of a poor widow might be more pleasing to the gods than the magnificent gifts of a rich merchant, if it was given with genuine devotion. The contrast between aristocratic and common perspectives on mythology was perhaps most evident in attitudes toward the heroes of the great epics. For the aristocrats, Achilles was a model of heroic excellence, a figure whose divine parentage and superhuman abilities made him worthy of emulation. His anger, his pride, his refusal to accept dishonor, these were seen as admirable qualities, evidence of his noble nature. The aristocrats saw in Achilles a reflection of their own divine heritage and their own claims to special status. But for common citizens, Achilles was a more ambiguous figure. His aristocratic virtues, his pride, his concern for honor, his willingness to sacrifice everything for glory, often seemed selfish and destructive. Many preferred Hector, the Trojan prince who fought not for personal glory, but to defend his family and city. Hector's devotion to his wife and son, his sense of duty to his people, his willingness to face death for others, these qualities resonated more deeply with citizens whose own lives were defined by family obligations and civic responsibilities. The mythology of the afterlife also reflected these social divisions. The aristocrats looked forward to the Elysian fields, a paradise reserved for heroes and the specially favored, where they would spend eternity in the company of the gods. There, tombs were elaborate monuments designed to ensure their continued honor and remembrance. The common citizens, by contrast, expected to join the shadowy multitudes in Hades, where social distinctions would be meaningless and all souls would share the same dim existence. Yet even this aristocratic privilege was not without its burdens. The myths made clear that divine favor came with divine expectations. The heroes of mythology were held to higher standards than ordinary mortals, and their failures were punished more severely. The story of Tantalus, condemned to eternal hunger and thirst for abusing his privileged position, served as a warning to aristocrats that their special status carried special responsibilities. The religious mysteries offered yet another perspective on these social divisions. The Eleusinian mysteries, centered on the myth of Demeter and Persephone, were open to all Greek-speaking people regardless of social status. Here, in the sacred halls of Eleusis, slaves could receive the same revelations as kings, and the promise of blessed afterlife was available to all initiates. The mysteries suggested that the truest nobility lay not in birth or wealth, but in spiritual understanding and moral purity. The initiation rituals deliberately broke down social barriers. Rich and poor, master and slave, citizen and foreigner all underwent the same trials, experienced the same revelations, and received the same promises.